What that will allow you to do is just see the indigenous peoples whose land you are standing on. But this acknowledgement is meant to challenge ongoing legacies of settler colonialism and really recognize the sovereignty of indigenous nations. The other link I want to share with you is how to access materials for today's workshop. So if you would, please visit the link that you see on the screen. There's also a QR code if you're using a device with a camera. And what you'll find in that folder, I'll go ahead and show you, are the slides from today's presentation, in addition to a handout in PDF or Word form. So go ahead and choose the version that you'd like and open it. This handout is meant to be interacted with, so you'll find spaces where you can type and think through your ideas, but you will want to have it open for today's workshop. Okay, so part one, we're going to start with just developing your professional brand. I will say I'm already a little over time, so I'm going to try to keep it brief. But today I really want to argue that everyone has a personal brand, whether or not they actively acknowledge and cultivate that brand. Because you're all active in your disciplinary and professional fields. I mean, you're here, you're attending a conference, that means you're active in these conversations. You're really already connected to ideas and organizations and a community of other teachers and scholars. And so what a well-formed professional brand does is it takes those connections and it curates them into this organized representation of what makes us who we are as professionals. And so these pieces already exist. They exist in your CV, in your publications, in your service, in the workshops that you do on campus. But a personal brand helps them fit together to tell this coherent story about who you are, what you do, and what you value. I really loved this idea that I took from this Borman-Shope piece that I'll cite more fully on the next slide. But it talks about how your brand is your work, how you do your work, and then what your work says about you to those who encounter it. In addition to thinking about our personal brand and cultivating that story, I also want to argue that your personal brand can help you really think about your identity in productive ways. And so what you'll see on screen is a Venn diagram that represents how academic faculty and staff can identify whether projects or roles land in what's called their personal brand sweet spot. And that's at the intersection of what we're passionate about, what we're skilled at, and what local needs exist. And you can know when we don't hit all three of those areas, we're engaging in risks. So for instance, when something is related to our passion and our skill set, but isn't a local need, it might become more of a pet or a hobby project. Whereas if it's something that engages our skill set and local needs, but we're not passionate about it, we might quickly burn out. Another thing to think about is how your brand might allow you to really reflect on your professional identity. We're all moving a million miles a minute. We're teaching and administering and doing service. We don't always carve out spaces to really reflect and integrate our identity into who we are and what we do. And so a personal brand can do that work. It also allows you to really think about how you're represented in online spaces, which I'm sure is not lost on us as ePortfolio practitioners. It can additionally make connections, right? It can integrate that integrative experience. It can integrate things like our research, our teaching, our service in ways that are helpful to telling who we are to others. And then finally, once we know who we are, we can use that personal brand as a lens to determine if something is a good investment of our time and our effort moving forward. And so what we're going to do is engage in a few just free writing responses that are going to help you develop a first draft of that personal brand statement. And so we're going to start with just a little listing and self-reflection. So what I'd like everyone to do is take just 2 minutes and identify 5 things. They can be accomplishments, skills, strengths, of which you are very proud. So again, these can be academic products, mentoring activities, teaching, clinical care, advocacy efforts, community engagement, whatever you like. But go ahead and list those 5 things and then just briefly note why you are proud of each of them. So I'm going to mute myself for just a couple of minutes for us to do that. So now what I want to encourage you to do is look across your 5 entries and look for some common themes. So what similarities or themes are emerging across this list? And you want to consider how those themes might connect with your future professional goals. So again, I'm going to mute myself for a few minutes and we're going to just look across our list to identify some themes. Okay, so this next stage is where we do the heavy lift in this session. So what we want to do now is move from those themes, those strengths, that list, to drafting a statement. And I will say it's okay if your statement is rough. At this point, we've spent a whole 5 minutes on this. And so there's no pressure or judgment here. But what I want you to do is take the next 5 minutes to compose a 1 to 2 sentence brand statement. So it should not be longer than 1 to 2 sentences. And what that statement should do is it should acknowledge and address your strengths and your goals, but it should reach back and grab onto those themes that you identified and those items on your list that you were so proud of. So this is sort of the weaving together. And I will ask if anyone is willing to share at the end of 5 minutes. And so I'll preface that so you can think about, okay, where am I at with this draft? Would I be willing to share? So I'm going to mute myself for 5 minutes and we'll do that. So Maria asks, can we hear an example? So an example might be thinking of my own professional development. I really care about professionalization for educators. And I'm really proud of the fact that I work with educational stakeholders across different ranks. I work with faculty, with staff, with undergraduate and graduate tutors, with graduate assistants. And so what I might say in my brand statement is that I enjoy having meaningful conversations about writing and writing instruction with different individuals across the institution. And then I might use a second sentence to unpack that if I felt it was helpful. But we kind of want this short, quippy thing. I hope that helps a little, Maria. Okay, so I'd love to now open the floor for anyone who'd be willing to share. And you're welcome to unmute yourself and share verbally. You can type what's in the chat. I'm happy to read it aloud. But let's hear some of these in the moment first draft personal brand statements.
I'll go ahead. Since I cheated and ran this by Amy because I was nervous. I didn't know if this was the right kind of thing, but I can go ahead and put mine in the chat. But it basically just says, words are my life. I love using words to make connections, to help others, and to do practical work.
Yeah, and what I love about that, Jennifer, is it centers that idea of like the word is kind of like at the heart of your identity, but then it shows actions, right? Like you're using words to make connections, to help others, to do practical work. As you refine, I might unpack what that practical work means, but I think that's, again, for like 5 minutes, that's awesome.
Thanks. Thanks for letting me cheat, Amy.
Yeah, of course. Okay, we have another one in the chat from Laura. Help others identify their strengths and values through career coaching and assessment tools, encourage and provide insights in order to accomplish their personal and professional goals. And I love that idea of coaching and helping others achieve what's important to them. I think it really shows, Laura, your service to others and that you want to help others reach their kind of pinnacle goals. Carly says, I care about making educational content, diverse perspectives and ideas more accessible to learners while ensuring they are equipped with tools to understand, analyze, and apply that content to reach their personal or professional goals. JW says, I empower my students. I love that word, empower my students by mentoring their development of personal and social identity. My research explores the way in which music shapes unique identities out of a complex of diverse experiences. Melody, do you want to share?
Yeah, I thought I'd read mine. I was starting to type it, but I'm not a very good typer. So I thought I would just share it. So um, as an educator, I want to build creativity across the curriculum through advancement of digital literacy and innovative technology coupled with student engagement, but to produce inquisitive minds that filtrate our society and make an impact on our global community.
Oh, I love it. So much richness there. I will say, as you revise, getting it down, but I love the
Yeah,
complex ideas.
yeah.
And I see some others want to share, so please just jump in.
Okay. Melody, thank you. That was great. So I'm going to piggyback on Melody because she's actually was once an instructor. She still is an instructor to me. I've taken several of her classes, but I had help with this. So I had an anonymous helper come in, and I love what I wrote down, and the way they changed it is wonderful. So mine says, I'm a lifelong learner who's always seeking opportunities to enhance my knowledge of approaches to teaching and mentoring. I enjoy collaborating to share what I've learned and my ideas with faculty and staff to find ways to enhance the university's academic and non-academic offering to promote student success. I don't know. Yeah, that was great. It was not my, I mean, I put a few words down, but my anonymous helper really created this wonderful branding of me. So thank you, whoever did this.
I love it. This is wonderful. And so many good ideas in the chat. Please do read through them, especially as you're looking for language or phrases to describe the work that we do. So, I mean, we're only 5 minutes in and look at how much y'all have accomplished already. I did also want to pause and just talk a little bit about this process. So did anything surprise you as you drafted this personal brand statement? What do you feel is working? What kind of still needs to be worked out with the draft you have? Sort of where are you in this moment?
Um, I'll share. I think for me, we run so fast that we don't often reflect. And my assistant asked me the other day, "You need to put together all the stuff you did this year because we're getting ready to report it out." And I'm like, "Oh crap, that's going to be really painful." And I don't think we like to look back on all the things that we've done. At least I don't. I just keep on plowing ahead. And so I think it's really important to reflect back and create a brand statement. I've never thought about doing that before. So I think it's really good. It's a really good thing to be quiet instead of just keeping on moving forward.
Yeah, I wanna validate and identify with what you said about like trucking along. That I absolutely have felt that since the pandemic, even before the pandemic a little. And you're right, we deserve to create that space for ourselves. But allowing ourselves, I think, to do that slow thinking, to pause and slow down and really reflect. It's something that we often encourage our students to do, but we don't always take the time to do that ourselves. So Kevin says in the chat, I was struck by how my values don't appear in my LinkedIn profile, which is too technical or skill focused. Oh, I love that. Paola, would you like to share?
Yeah, perhaps a little bit of the struggle is how generic to keep it and how specific to get. I find values overall, like anything else, and principles are very broad. And so, you have a value of giving as opposed to receiving, of mentoring and things like that. But I find that those might not communicate exactly what it is we do. So I was thinking of asking, what do you think is most effective here? Should we aim for a little bit more specificity as opposed to very big, broad, the bettering mankind kind of statements? Are they as beautiful as they are and poetic as they are they as useful as something a bit more specific?
That is such a wonderful point and a great tension to point out. I don't have an answer, but I will say the reason why we put brand statements in conversations with ePortfolios is so that our artifacts can show those values in action and motion. Because you're right, I don't want to just walk into a room and say, I'm going to have a meaningful conversation about writing with anyone in the world, anyone at all. Because that doesn't necessarily have value. But it's when I can put that value in conversation with artifacts that show me working with Writing Center tutors, working with faculty, working with staff, that starts to take on meaning for my audience. The second thing I'll say is, you might have a couple of brand statements in your pocket that are geared towards the different stakeholder audiences that you know you have. And so don't feel like you're tied down to one of these. Yes, and Paul brings up that idea of audiences. Absolutely. Brandy mentions taking it from casual to a professional audience. Yes, we cannot say I value having my shit together on LinkedIn. That is true. Although my brand statement when I was on the market should have been, please hire me, please, please. I also just want to validate that creating something like this is a personal risk, right? We're sort of burying ourselves, and that can feel scary. And so I appreciate you all engaging in this activity with me. Okay, so this is for your next week, next month, further thinking in this moment. But after you've refined a brand statement to a place where you feel pretty comfortable with it, it's a good activity to then go to your CV or your promotions dossier, whatever has the criteria that you kind of want to measure your future goals with, and to see where your brand does or doesn't align. And that's not to say that if your brand doesn't align, you have to change your CV, or if your CV doesn't align, you have to change your brand. But those two things should be in conversation. And so this is where you can reassess that statement, you can revise it, or you can think forward. So maybe I want this absent value to become a part of my professional identity. What opportunities do I need to seek out and integrate into my experiences moving forward to make that a reality? And of course, once you have a brand statement, reuse that language, bring it into your professional documents, your reflective writing, allow it to guide decisions and how you design your e-portfolio, whether that's the content or the design. It's a really nice frame. And then I'm sure we all know what e-portfolios are. I did want to include it in case we had folks who had never made a faculty or staff e-portfolio or had never used e-portfolios. They were joining us to sort of get an idea of the temperature of the water. And so when we think of a faculty or staff e-portfolio, we think of that website that tells the story about our professional identity and supports that story using artifacts. And of course, we want to curate and contextualize those artifacts with reflective writing that explains how they connect to our future plans and our future goals. Okay, and with that, we're going to move on to section 2 of the workshop, selecting and curating artifacts. Okay, so artifacts, as I mentioned, show evidence of your skills, your experiences, your knowledge, and they can include any kind of media. So they might be documents, images, videos, audio files, certificates, awards, presentations, assignment sheets, philosophy documents. Really, the sky is the limit when it comes to artifacts. But what I want to really focus your attention on is how we really strategically adapt our artifacts for the e-portfolio. And I find that this can be more challenging when you're developing a faculty or staff e-portfolio, because you want to make sure your artifacts are in a format that they're going to engage the viewers and really use the advantages of that digital space. And so, for example, if you have a research project or a publication that you want to include in your e-portfolio, you probably don't want to attach a 34-page document as your sole artifact. Your viewer may not want to engage with 34 pages of text when they're viewing your e-portfolio, but you might create a visual abstract. And that abstract could be very engaging. And then if they so desired, they could read the full research project article. Maybe you want to take your teaching philosophy and turn it into a short video. Oh, and Kevin and I are on the same wavelength. And you can take that 10-page syllabus and you can turn it into an infographic. So think about how your artifacts can transform as they move into the e-portfolio. And I always find that act of transformation gives me space to think a little differently. Like, oh, maybe that infographic I made for my e-portfolio, maybe my students would really benefit having that. And so what we're going to do next is fill out this guiding chart that just gives you space to start brainstorming your artifacts. And I'm going to go ahead and share it on the handout so you can see. So it's under session 2. And so what you'll want to do is brainstorm some potential artifacts. You can brainstorm as many as you'd like, but it's also okay if you just get through one. And then think a little bit about how that artifact illustrates your personal brand. So reaching back to session 1, why will it matter to your ePortfolio's audience? How does this connect with who you are? And then the third column, how will you present this artifact to be engaging for viewers of your ePortfolio? And so here's an example. I might have a teaching philosophy in my ePortfolio. It's a pretty common philosophy document. And what I want my teaching philosophy to do is to tell my ePortfolio viewers that I value my students' voices, that I let them have a say in my classroom, and that my philosophy allows that to show others what that value looks like in practice. But I maybe don't want to attach a 3-page philosophy statement or a 2-page philosophy statement. Instead, what I might do is transform it into an infographic that has like my teaching values on one side and then practices illustrated on the other. So that's just an idea. And so what I'd like to do is give everyone 5 minutes just to work on that chart. Again, get as far as you'd like. You don't need to have all the boxes filled in. But then I'd like to open up for a discussion where we really think about the ideas that kind of came through this chart making. And so I'm going to go ahead and mute myself for 5 minutes while we work, and then we'll come back together. Okay, so let's talk about what you all worked on. So what ideas did you have for artifacts, and how did you go about thinking through how you might make those artifacts more engaging for your ePortfolio viewers? Again, feel free to unmute yourself. You can jump in or you can type into the chat if you'd prefer. Oh, you are muted.
Of course, this phrase of 2020 haunts me in 2021. You're on mute. So I ended up with ABC as my artifacts: articles I've written, books that I've recently published, and courses that I've produced that I've released in different ways for people to consume. And so the ways that I've tried to engage people who go check those things out is I ask them, how are you going to use it? Or after the fact, how did you apply what you learned from this artifact?
Yeah, and I love the ABCs of artifacts. Another article. Paul, do you want to share?
Yeah, I was looking back at from our initial branding and looking at some of the things that I try to offer to students. So I teach journalism, and so the 3 that I put real quick here, we have a news website that we developed a few semesters ago. And then in the middle graphic, I put it's an opportunity to build a reporting portfolio for students. And how would I present it was, I was thinking again on the fly, based on what you were talking about a moment ago, a graphic with pull quotes, maybe from some of the students, just, brief statements, about what they, published on the website, rather than trying to get, an entire article there to show that off, but also to have a link to the website itself from those pull quotes. The other one was internships, which provide outside the classroom experience and networking. And so that could be a video of a student at their internship site with a quick interview from them, less than 5 minutes about their experience. And then the last thing was just looking at it from just my experience as a journalist, showing off some of my reporting and teaching philosophy, kind of a combination, which would share my passion for journalism along with my credentials for teaching it. And so that would be that one I was just quickly doing at the very end, but maybe an infographic with logos of the news outlets that I had worked for, along with links to some of the work. So those were some of my ideas.
I think that's great. And one thing I really love that you touched on is when we have these multimodal artifacts, like we have a website, but we still want to make it condensed, which I'm so glad you thought about how to do that. Because what will often happen, I'm a bit of a distracted viewer, is I'll click on someone's ePortfolio, they'll take me to a website, and I'll lose myself in that website.
A rabbit
And so-
hole. Yeah.
Yes. Yes. I'm so glad you're like, well, how can I condense that while still also giving them the website? Yeah. Paola, what do you want to add?
Full disclosure, I'm a designer and I'm a professor of design. So from a design point of view, I'm just going to talk about the visuals. So I think thinking of design thinking and how in design we approach a branding or design problem is you have to have a very clear idea of what message you want to communicate. And so the same way you have sort of a branding through a personal statement of where you want to go, the visual should communicate that. And so there are, if you're an extremely casual, informal, very open, very social, and you want to type of person and you want to create your professional portfolio to say that, then you probably wouldn't choose graphics that are extremely controlled and organized and aligned, right? And by the same token, if you work in an academic field that it's a bit more formal and where trust and reliability are more important, then you want to communicate that and perhaps not have clip art that is extremely informal or sometimes even cartoony. So one suggestion I always give to people is go on Pinterest and do some visual search. Start a Pinterest board, look for graphics, look for examples of infographics, look for examples of websites, and try to get a little bit of a branding board for yourself of what colors you're attracted to, what do you think says who you are. And look for examples. There's lots of examples there on how to create infographics and visuals for articles. And then you can start creating. Canva is a great website that's free. And sometimes there are things you need to pay for, but they're $1 as you add on it. And it's extremely user-friendly for those who don't work with, Photoshop and Illustrator. And the second piece of perhaps think about is that perhaps we filter information in degrees. So you give a little bit of a teaser, and if somebody wants more information, there's somewhere to click and go, as opposed to doing an information dump, which sometimes we feel like we need to do because we don't want to leave everything behind because we've worked so hard on it. But I think layers of information, if somebody wants to read the full paper, it's available, but perhaps it's not, there's only a cover of it with some graphics, because visuals can be extremely attractive. And if you look at the newer versions of portfolios and CVs, they're very visual and very little text out there. So I think it might be good to keep up with the times that way.
Yes, thank you so much for sharing your expertise with us. I will say I'm working on my ePortfolio in a faculty working group with someone who has a background in design. It's totally changed how I feel about visual design. She's telling me about color theory. And so you are certainly an asset. When we talk about at the end, perhaps you all want to connect and form some working groups, I think you're going to be someone that people would love to work with. And so once you have your artifacts, then we want to think about how we communicate the artifacts to our viewers. So that's where we bring in this reflective writing, which again, we're familiar with. We ask our students to do it, but what does it mean for us to truly reflect on our artifacts? And so when we think about reflective writing, there should be a functional aspect. So it should give someone the context that they don't have for this artifact. It should also explain how the artifact connects back to this larger story that you want to tell through your personal brand. Hopefully, it will also make connections to future experiences. So for instance, if you're sharing your teaching philosophy, maybe you want to share a little bit about what led you to that philosophy, but you might also look forward. What does it look like to continue to grow and practice that philosophy? And then the hardest part, I think, it should be written in a way that it is clear and understandable to diverse audiences. So if an administrator from your institution pulls up your ePortfolio, will they get what they need from that contextualization? If someone in your field pulls up your ePortfolio, will they get what they need from that contextualization. So how can you write it in a way that is adaptable? And so we're going to go ahead and just do a first brainstormy draft of that contextualization by working with the worksheet. And so again, I'm going to take you there. You can choose one thing on your graph. And then these questions are just really meant to kind of get you thinking. And so we'll take a few minutes, maybe not 10 because I'm tight on time, but we'll take a few minutes to get started on contextualizing an artifact. Okay, so my last kind of piece of advice as you're starting to think about contextualizing your artifacts is to be diligent about length before you move anything into your ePortfolio. And I say that because in working with faculty from across the disciplines, different disciplinary communities have very different ideas for what a good artifact reflection length is. I have a background in writing studies and English. We tend to tolerate words at a higher rate than some of the other disciplines. But I'll say I work for an office of a provost, and so I'm a central unit. I want to communicate in ways that are meaningful for those stakeholders as well. And so just really reflecting on your audience, thinking about length, thinking about language is an important next step before you move anything into that ePortfolio space. And so with that, we are going to go ahead and take a 5-minute break. When we come back, we're going to look at some example ePortfolios, and we're going to talk about organization and design. You are welcome to join us. You are welcome to take the next session off, whatever is good use of your time. For coming back, we're going to go ahead and launch into organization and design. And we're actually going to start this part of the workshop by doing a little viewing. So we're going to look at a few examples. And so in just a minute, I'm going to go ahead and put some example links on the screen and in the chat for you. And I want you to choose an example to explore for the next 10 minutes. Obviously, you're not going to be able to engage with everything in the ePortfolio in a 10-minute window. But as you do, consider things like, who is this creator, right? What ideas or values constitute their personal brand? What artifacts did they use to support that story they're telling us of who they are? And how did they organize these artifacts to reinforce the story they are telling? So I want you to make connections back to brand, back to artifacts, but also start thinking about organization. And I'll go back to that slide while you are perusing. But here are some examples that I pulled. I'm going to also put those in the chat. So I pulled from a variety of disciplines, but then I also wanted to pull a couple of lab examples. And so I pulled one from STEM and one that is more sociologist, human family developmental sciences. And I did that because when I talk to some faculty, what they tell me is, I don't really need an individual ePortfolio, but I would love a portfolio for my lab, or I would love it for my grant, or I would love it for this philanthropy that connects with my research, or this organization that I started. And so I also want to give you the space to think about what type of professional portfolio is going to serve you best. And it might be an individual portfolio, but it might be something else. And so go ahead, choose an example, whatever fits your interests, and we'll spend the next 10 minutes exploring. Okay, so I want to interrupt your thoughts and bring us back together because I want to hear about what you liked in these examples. And I do want to kind of guide you to think about what you like, what benefits here. I know when you view anyone's ePortfolio, you might think, about what you would have done differently, but these are colleagues, they are educators, they're working the same grind we are. And so let's really reflect upon them positively. So what did you like? Who is this person? What artifacts did you see? How did you see them telling that story? And again, feel free to unmute your mic and just jump in, or use the chat if you'd feel more comfortable typing your ideas.
This is Margot. One thing I noticed on Janae Combs that I really liked is that she had on the sidebar, she said, things I care about. it showed up on a couple different pages, but I can't remember, maybe under her writing or something, or blog. Yeah, there it is. I really liked, just at a glance, these are just words, not full sentences. Like I just got so much about her, and each one, of course, did go to her blog writing, which is, amazing. But I really like that.
Yeah, such a smart use of keywords, right? Really leveraging the affordances of that virtual space, so that if I'm there to learn about a particular project, but I think, well, I also care about accessibility, I'm going to click that. So it's a nice way to create a space for people to play and continue to engage with your work. Jillian says the simplicity of design for Janae as well. Kevin likes the use of tags and keywords as well. What else? And I have these examples pulled up, so I'm going to just drag them to the screen as you all mention them.
I'm going to go to Heidi Hong's. It's just a really simple thing that she did on hers. And I just love the idea that underneath her name, she has educator, storyteller, and editor. And I just really like that. And then comes her tabs of her portfolio. But I just really like that she describes herself again and puts in, not only does she educate, but she tells stories and she edits. And I liked it.
Yeah, smart use of personal brand, right? Like maybe this isn't a personal brand statement, but we certainly get brand poking through there for sure. Kevin, what did you want to add?
I liked how people used visual representation of their work as opposed to just long lists of bullets. So Dr. Covington Ward on her publications page just went to the extra effort of finding the representation of each journal. Back to the identity, she has a whole section about me where she talks about her work in other countries. And so it helps you get to know her a little better, in addition to kind of getting an idea of where her passions lie. So I just liked that aspect of it, the visual aspect.
Yeah, thank you for sharing that. And one thing I really appreciate about the example you gave is, we've been talking a lot about creating these visual infographics, create a video, create this, create that. But that visual component, it doesn't have to be high labor for us, right? It can just be taking the cover of a journal or creating a photo that can go with our publication. So thank you for mentioning that. Mary says, I like the ease of navigating, so easy, identifiable. The labels should let you easily find what you are looking for. Absolutely. Can I just pop on the page and find what I want? Ryan agrees. Looking at Jessie Stommel's, very simple pared down navigation seems to be shared across a number of these examples. Yes. And another thing I really like is Jessie uses a blog to contextualize a lot of these artifacts. And so again, we can talk about the concepts of blog versus ePortfolio, blog in ePortfolio, but it is just another option that you all have. Oh, I see two people have their hands raised. Oh, eBlogfolio. Yes, absolutely. Paola, do you want to get us started? And then Paul, you can jump in as soon as she's done.
Yes, thank you. I think the oparalab.org one, I think that's a great example of sticking to a very specific branding style. It's a little bit moody. I don't know if so if you scroll down, images are in black and white. And again, it's a substance abuse and sexual health lab. So these are probably difficult conversations. So again, it's a little bit moody, but as you start and as you scroll, it's pretty upbeat and pretty positive. But the branding it doesn't distract, right? It's extremely cohesive. It's very consistent. It goes in small paragraphs, big paragraphs. So you can get a pretty good idea of what it is they do it with very minimum cognitive load for whoever's observing it, because your brain doesn't have to make sense of the graphic design because it's very consistent. So that's the advantage of having a template. And sometimes these are out there for sale, for purchase, but it might make life very easy, because once you understand it's like horizontal bands, black and white photos. And then she's actually edited, and I don't know if it's, her or, but they've edited the other photos to be black and white. Obviously, they Photoshop them so that it's very consistent with the branding. And again, the use of typeface and things like that. And if you compare that with some of the other websites where the information is great, but it's in different formats, your brain has to work harder when the format is very different. So getting creative is good. Simple is always better. That would be my suggestion.
Absolutely. And thank you for mentioning templates, right? That you don't have to start from scratch. You can start with a template and then adapt it and right, put your spin on it. Paul, what did you want to add?
I was just going to say with Adam Dastrup, and I'm just going to get it back here in front of me. There were two things that I thought were pretty cool. Just from the very beginning, just as in his welcome page, right? He titles it The Geographer's Notebook. So I thought that was kind of a nice way just to kind of enter his space here. But then you kind of have to go through it. So if you go to teaching, and then with the drop-down menu from teaching, the instructional delivery, and within that, you could see the three areas, but the learning theories, and just what I liked about in the learning theories, which just kind of reminded me that, I don't necessarily have to have my own videos or my own material to get across the point of like the types of theories that I like to use. He's using some, just embedded videos that are TED Talks, right? So I thought that was pretty cool.
Yeah, great point. I will say, if you want to use a TED Talk, make sure you're embedding a link and you're not downloading their video and republishing it, which we'll get to those like technical questions later, but absolutely great observations. Okay, I'm sorry to cut the conversation short. I am going to push us along to just a very brief, quick and dirty design principles talk. Again, this is not meant to be an all-encompassing presentation on design, but just some very easy principles that you can keep in mind as you think about designing. And this comes from Robin Williams, the Non-Designer's Design Book. So this idea of using design principles so your work does not look like crap. And specifically, we want to use contrast, repetition, alignment, and proximity. And so first, contrast, the idea that if you make something different, you actually want to make it strikingly different. So don't just make it kind of different or close to the same, but really leverage that contrast. So this could be when you want something to stand out on a page. So you're going to create a different color or a different typeface. It's going to stand out in a striking way. You can do that with font, color, positioning. Here's an example, right? We have a lot of contrast here. This is a student example. Here's an example where contrast is not used. And so contrast has an aesthetic, but also a really functional advantage, which is it becomes more readable when contrast is applied. Okay, next, repetition. So reusing the same or similar elements throughout your design. So this might be using the same font, using the same font size, using the same logic in terms of how your pages are laid out. But what this does is it creates a unity, a consistency, and a cohesion. That's really important. It also makes it more usable. If all your pages have the same approach, the same general layout, as a user, I don't have to cognitively focus on switching between pages because I can anticipate what I'm going to expect. It also creates this whole experience. So your pages are not radically different. They are parts of this larger whole. You want to make sure you're repeating color and you're using different shades intentionally to create an impact. And you're not doing that too often. So there shouldn't be a busy effect. And so here's an example of repetition. I'm going to show you just several of these pages. So they all sort of have a similar layout, where as a reader, I know I'm going to see a header of a certain size. I know I'm going to see font in a particular place. And so I know where to start reading the page. Here's a different example. So here's this person's about me. Here's one of their subpages. Here's another one of their subpages. And so it looks like we get the navigation with the same colors, but it really looks like those 3 pages could be in totally different e-portfolios. Alignment. So making sure you're thinking about placement and the visual connection that the different components of your page can have. A good rule of thumb is to imagine a grid on your screen and to make sure things are fitting and aligning within that grid. And so this can be a good way to communicate the relationship between elements. So things that you want us to relate should be closer together. They should be aligned. And the eye tends to preference a left or a right alignment as opposed to a center alignment. It's harder for us to just naturally deduce that centering. So you might want to favor that particular kind of alignment. And so here's an example. We get some really clean alignment between the images, between the font sections. Here's a less aligned page. So again, just thinking about the work that you have to engage in to read each page. It's a little easier to just engage and continue reading here than it is here. And finally, proximity. So elements that are close to other elements will seem connected or grouped together. And so making sure you're doing that with intentionality. So as I said before, if elements are related, you should put them near each other so we know that they're related. If they are not related, you should give some white space, some separation. We shouldn't have to search for information, and part of that is going to be because of the visual layout that you create in your ePortfolio. And we're actually going to practice some of this in our final activity. So last session, bringing it all together, we're going to do a brief activity and then a Q&A. Kevin is going to go ahead and also share a survey for this workshop session. And so if you don't mind, go ahead and pop that open as a window to revisit a little later. So what we're going to do is we're going to actually plan a slide, a page of our ePortfolio. We're going to do some rough visualization work. And so let me go ahead and get that link and put it in the chat as well. So this link is going to take you to a shared Google Doc. It's right here. I'm projecting it now. And so what I'd like you to do is actually choose a place on this blank doc as your workspace. And I'm going to go ahead and just make a few more slides so we have enough. There we go. And so what we're going to do is use the shapes feature and the text feature to plan out a page on your ePortfolio. And if you're just starting the ePortfolio, you might want to start with your home page. But if you already have an ePortfolio started, you might think like, hey, which page might need a refresh? I'm gonna use this activity to think through another organization, a visual organization for that page. And so if you go to the second slide, there are two videos. If you're unfamiliar with Google Slides, it'll just walk you through how to add shapes and how to add text. So that is there for you. But I would like for us to take just 10 minutes to create that skeletal plan of a page. And then to maybe practice using those CRAP principles a little bit, and then we'll discuss. So I'm going to go ahead and mute myself, but if you have any questions, please feel free to just kind of verbally say your question or type it into the chat. Okay, so I am going to stop you. Sorry, you know, a 2-hour workshop about all the ePortfolio things. I can only help you kind of start thinking about the things. But I do want to ask you to reflect a little bit on this process. So when I'm at a conference, especially an in-person conference, I always kind of make a list in my mind, like, what do I need to do on Monday? Or what am I going to do when I get back to my office? And so I want to know, like, what do you feel good about in this moment as far as thinking about your ePortfolio? What challenges or questions remain? And then what are your next steps? What are you going to do on Monday or in fall or in spring?
I'll go ahead and say something, Amy. I know beyond a shadow of a doubt that I need to build one in order to understand what the students are going to go through when we roll this out at our college, because this is the graphic design and things of that sort is a little bit more challenging. We're I'm at Austin Community College, and we're an Adobe Creative Cloud campus. And so I had some students who talked to me about some of the challenges they have with using Adobe. And I think they're going to be experiencing the same thing, quite possibly, with the vendor that we use. So I know I need to definitely do this to be able to better empathize with the students' experience.
Yeah, thank you for sharing that. And also drawing a very good point, which is the empathy that we have the potential to develop as we make our own e-portfolios. That mean we might want to see everything perfectly aligned on a student e-portfolio, and then we might go to do it ourselves and realize, oh, like that's a little harder than I thought. So yeah, thank you for reminding us of that opportunity for compassion and empathy. Kevin writes in the chat, narrowing my scope, not making an everything but the kitchen sink folio. Yes. So how do we tell that story? Not everything can go into the story. That's why it's a story and not an encyclopedia. So what's in your story? What else? Paul mentions baby steps. Yeah, you do not have to go home and do this weekend. I mentioned that I'm currently in a working group. We meet every Friday. Every Friday afternoon, we meet and we work on our e-portfolios for an hour. And we understand it's a process, and we understand it's not going to get done in a day. We're doing the slow run. And so don't be afraid to do that work slowly. And also, I mean, you're in a room with, at this point, 25 other folks. Don't be afraid to reach out and say like, hey, who wants to do a working group in the chat, and exchange emails. Yeah, Ryan says, building these takes way longer than anyone might presume. For sure. Yes, it is a process. And it should, I mean, right, the way reflection and integrative learning works is it's not a static document. So that's the other thing. Margot says, thinking through my audience and who is more primary. Yeah, instead of meeting the needs of all the audiences. Yes, and you might have, I mean, I have heard of people having multiple portfolios. If you want to engage in that labor, you might also have different pages that can appeal to different audiences, with the understanding that people are going to go to the pages that align with their purpose for viewing your e-portfolio. Okay, so I thought it might be helpful just to look at some common e-portfolio questions and talk them out with you. I would love for other people to jump in and share their expertise as well. If you have additional questions, please feel free to add them in the chat, and we can certainly add them to the discussion. So the first is, what platform should I use? I will say I used Wix to build my e-portfolio. You have a lot of variety out there. Oh yeah, and Kevin mentions microfolios. Yeah, so again, you don't have to have all the things. It might just be a teaching folio or a course. I've heard of people building a portfolio for a single course and then kind of tying them together. So in terms of platforms, again, like I mentioned, I use Wix. I like it because it's public facing. I like it because I own it. My institution does not own it, and so it can travel with me. I've also used Weebly. I've used WordPress. I'm not a huge fan of the widgets in WordPress. I get a little frustrated with those. I've done some Google sites, but what other platforms do you all like? What works for you? Advocate for WordPress. Yep, a lot of free options. As you're thinking about platforms, you might want to look and see if they are, oh, Mahara, yeah. If they are like how accessible they are. I will say a lot of the free platforms are not going to be perfect in terms of accessibility, but thinking about if they can be used by assistive devices, if they can be viewed across a smartphone, those are questions you might ask yourself. You might look at the end user licensing agreement, think about what you're giving away when you create that free account. Oh, thank you, Helen. Helen dropped a resource in the chat on microfolios. So Kevin likes Pathbright, PebblePad. So again, you have options. Another big question I get from faculty is, do I need to purchase a domain name? And that's the link that you go to. So for instance, my portfolio is myname.com. It's not like wix.amy.auburn.96. And so you can purchase a domain name. But a nice workaround is if you wanted to create like a bit.ly, or if your institution has a link shortener that you can create, you can also do that to kind of get the aesthetic of a personalized domain name without having to pay the price for that domain. So in terms of accessibility, what should I be thinking about as I build my ePortfolio when it comes to accessibility? And I did want to actually show you this on my ePortfolio. So one super small thing that you can do as you're building your ePortfolio is use styles. And so what that means is as you're adding things like headers, you're marking them as headers in the ePortfolio builder that you're using versus paragraphs, which you're marking as paragraphs. Another really simple thing you can do is adding alt text. So adding alt text to your images as you upload them. That's something that's much easier to do while you're building it. And then finally, one thing I really like about Wix is it lets me toggle between cell phone view and desktop view. And so that's another thing in terms of accessibility that you might think about as you're building. And another advantage of Wix is I can actually manipulate this cell phone view without, like, I'll bring this down here, without impacting my desktop view. And so it's nice that I can individually arrange these if I need to, but I can also just have them automatically work. Paola mentioned templates. And so a template might be another thing that can drive the accessibility of your pages. So templates tend to have accessibility built in if you're using a good website builder. And so it might group things, it might pre-label headings. So that's a way to kind of get ahead on accessibility. As you're uploading videos and infographic syllabi and all of those cool media things that we talked about, you want to make sure you're creating an option for how people can engage with them. So maybe I can look at your infographic, but I could also read a caption that describes what the infographic is and what I'm supposed to get from it. Maybe I can view your video, but I can also read a transcript in case I don't have the bandwidth to watch the video, or in case I'm using an assistive technology and I can't watch the video. So are there multiple ways to engage with content? And then the last thing I wanted to show you with regards to accessibility is a color blindness checker. And there are tons of these out there. This is called Spectrum. It's just a Chrome add-on. But what it lets you do is view your page with different versions of color blindness. And so it'll let you know if something doesn't contrast enough, or if something becomes unreadable. And so that's I think another kind of cool, thoughtful thing you can do for accessibility as you're building your page. Any other kind of advice when it comes to accessibility from the group? Yeah, Kevin, can you talk more about that descriptive link text? That's a great point.
You bet. So if some of you may have gone to websites and seen links that just say, click here, click here, click here, all the way down the page. And for someone with a screen reader, they can jump from link to link and all they hear is click here, and they don't know where they're going to go. So instead, a good guideline is to basically turn the link into a short descriptive statement. Download my CV, or visit a gallery of my work, or check out my teaching philosophy. So that what gets read to someone with a screen reader and tells them what's going to happen. And many people will also encourage you to say, link opens new window, if that's what you ask the link to do.
Yeah, that's great. And I would say, as we're engaging with things on your ePortfolio, you also want to make sure I don't need to have anything downloaded on my device to view your attachment. So for instance, if you are attaching your CV, I would rather see a PDF version than a Word version, so that if I'm on a device that doesn't have Word, I can still open and view your PDF easily. I can also view it more easily across devices. And so thinking about the types of files you're attaching is another good one. Jillian says, oh yes, please check the W3 web content accessibility guidelines. Do not include long links. Yes, because a screen reader will read all of it. And also all caps. I think sometimes we do that for aesthetic, but make sure you're not actually typing it out in all caps, because a screen reader will read individual letters to you. So that's an arduous way to engage with your content. Any other accessibility tips? This is great.
Just one more, that if people include a table, probably to display any data, or hopefully not to mock up your page, but to use a header row so that, again, screen readers can help people who are need accommodations to make sense of a table. They don't have to memorize what that header row was as they get down farther into the table.
Yeah, great advice. So moving from accessibility to larger ethical considerations, like what ethical considerations do I need to make as I'm developing my ePortfolio? Oh yes, and Jillian mentions there are built-in accessibility checkers on Adobe, they're on Word, they're on PowerPoint, they're really wonderful. So first, you might think about privacy. So do you want anyone to be able to search your name, find your ePortfolio, and open the page? Do you want to just have a home page and have the rest of the content be password protected? Do you want it to be unsearchable? Privacy is something you should think about as you're building this public space. The other thing is how you're representing others. So if you are a teacher, please do not just put a bunch of pictures of your students on your ePortfolio without talking to them. I would even argue maybe you want to opt for photos where it's you, or it's like the back of their heads where they can't be identified. But if you're showing their likeness on your ePortfolio, please make sure they've given you permission. You don't know someone's situation. They might have a restraining order against someone. They might be involved in a domestic violence dispute. And so please don't just put photos of individuals out on the public web for others to see. Careful with geotagging. Yes. Yeah. Are you giving away your location? As you upload your CV, do you have your address and home phone number? Do you want to give that information out? Things to think about. Another kind of larger umbrella conversation to think about is copyright. So make sure you're not just pulling images off the web, even if you cite them. You do not have permission to reuse them in your ePortfolio. And I know you might be hearing this and thinking like, I'm not a student. But there are algorithms that will search professional websites and pull copyrighted material and send threatening emails to individuals. And so you want to make sure you're building your website thoughtfully in a way that's not going to put you at personal or professional risk. Any other tips about kind of public representation, public versus private, that element of this digital ethics sphere? Oh, I have one more, sorry. If you're sharing an article that has been published, please link to that publication. So for instance, if you are in the International Journal of ePortfolios, they are an open access journal, go ahead and link to that article on their page. Don't download it and then upload a PDF to your ePortfolio. That is technically a copyright violation, but also you want to drive the traffic to their website so that you're kind of getting the analytics on that back end too. Okay, and finally, feedback. So once I have an ePortfolio, where can I go to get feedback? I really love informal professional working groups. And so I would encourage you to seek out people on your campus who are doing this work, to seek out people at this conference that are doing this work, and to form an informal working group, to meet once a week and just work on your ePortfolios, or to meet once a month to exchange and give feedback. But we're part of this larger community of practice. And so I would say really participate in it, lean on one another. Also, it's helpful to get feedback. You don't want to just develop your ePortfolio in a bubble. You might also take it to a teaching and learning center, a writing center, a digital literacy center. So there might be some spaces on your institutional campus where you can also get feedback. Any other suggestions on getting feedback from someone?
I asked a question about how did someone, and I think in the first session, about their experience with creating e-portfolios, and because I had a terrible experience trying to attempt it in my class. And she said to build your e-portfolio with the students. And I thought, what a great idea. We can build together, where I can start building my own and they start building theirs. So we would do a step-by-step process. So the feedback would be from them while we're building together an e-portfolio.
I love that idea of sharing your process with your students. I will say they might not know your audience. So certainly take their feedback. You're participating in this learning community within your classroom. That's really beautiful, but also don't be afraid to reach out to folks who might know your audience a little bit better too. So Tracy mentions we have an out of practice community with Candace and Helen. They'll be facilitating a review session tomorrow from 2 to 3 Pacific. So if you want some feedback, you have an opportunity right here. Maria mentions that she'd like to join a group. So if anyone else is interested in joining a working group, please go ahead and respond to Maria in the chat. Maybe y'all can exchange emails. Kevin says if you're using the comments feature, you might moderate your comments, yes, so that you don't get like trolls on your blog sharing grotesque, terrible things. And then yes, Kevin also shared the evaluation form. Thank you, Kevin. Any other questions or comments? Well, thank you all so much. You made 2 hours just fly by. I so enjoyed talking with you. And I'll go ahead and put my email in the chat as well. And so feel free to reach out if you need anything.